welcome to Music Mania. I am your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today's episode is coming out a good bit later than normal because I am recording this on the day that the video actually releases, unlike normal when I record these, 2 to 3 days before the video releases. But because October 31st was a Friday, and Friday is usually big music release day, and the weekend was a little bit busier than anticipated, and my work was a little bit slower than anticipated this weekend as well. I just didn't end up having enough time to get this recorded before the day of, so we are recording this the day of. There are about 25 albums and EPs that released in October 2025 that I checked out and will be ranking all in order from least favorite to most favorite for the month. So let's just go ahead and get on into it. My least favorite album that I checked out in October was sort of a technicality in that I actually did not finish it. That was Mella's Or So I've Been Told, which is an album that I actually have no idea how to describe properly what it even is in the first place. But what it was is absolutely not what I was thinking it would be. I didn't listen to any of the singles for this album ahead of time, and if I had, I would have had a much better idea of what the album actually would have been, and also probably would just not have checked out the album in the first place. Whatever this music is, I don't know how to describe it, is not something that I'm really personally interested in listening to, especially not at the moment, and so I got a few songs into the album here, maybe only a couple songs, I don't remember. I was just like, this isn't for me, and I stopped playing it right there. So it's nothing to inherently disparage the album as being awful. I'm giving it a 1.5 star just kind of as a benefit of the doubt kind of thing. It's not like I think this was an absolute travesty, like a 0.5 star or even just 1 star or something like that. It's like maybe there's a time and a place where I could listen to this and enjoy it, so I gave it that benefit of the doubt, but all things told, just not at all anything that I was expecting it to be, let alone looking for, and so I just simply did not finish it. I was not in the mood. But next up is an EP, a joint EP between Peeling Flesh and what is the other artist? Hounds of War. Never heard of Hounds of War before. Peeling Flesh, if you watched my my album ranking for September 2025, Peeling Flesh released an album there that I wasn't very hot on either. So really, I don't entirely know why I checked out this EP in the first place, but I decided to give it a shot. And it's not the worst thing in the world. It's fine, but also just not something that I really enjoy very much. It's not really my style, so it didn't really click with me. That was item number 24. Next up is an album that I think is not going to be a popular opinion here, in that the Acacia Strain's You Are Safe From God here is an album that a lot of people really like, and my apologies on Music Board not showing some album covers for whatever reason. Sometimes the metadata doesn't always work out super well. But You Are Safe From God here is fine. I think this album is definitely a little bit more sludgy than I personally enjoy in deathcore, so it doesn't really click with me inherently. And there's also just something about the Acacia Strain that it just hasn't really clicked with me in general. For every album that I've listened to, I'm pretty sure I've listened to everything they've put out in the 2020s and not liked any of the albums. So I think it's just a case of me not really being a fan of the Acacia Strain, and certainly not a fan of what they are doing this decade, if nothing else. And again, it's not even like the album's that bad. It was just a little bit weird because I remember listening to one of the singles and being like, oh yeah, this is actually pretty good. I'm looking forward to checking out the full album. Full album came out. I couldn't even tell which one of the songs on it was the single that I enjoyed because all of it was just so for me. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm not in the mood. I think it's just because I don't really enjoy the Acacia Strain that much, so I'm sorry about that. Next up is going to be Stare Into the Seething Wounds by Extortionist. I've not listened to Extortionist before, but I have heard of them. I think they have a pretty good reputation, all things considered, and certainly Stare Into the Seething Wounds was something a little bit different from anything that I've listened to in core so far this year, or even tangentially related to core, and I thought the album was super solid for what it was, because it's sort of core oriented, but also just incorporating a lot of other elements that make it unique and different, I guess, is really the only way to put it. I like the album a solid amount. Definitely not something that I'll like return to unless I want to check out more Extortionist specifically, but I thought the album was solid for what it was. You know, it definitely was not a bad album, and was something I enjoyed, but realistically, when it comes right down to it, other than those last few albums that I've talked about, last few albums and EPs that I just didn't really like very much, everything from here up until like, I don't know, the top like 10 or something like that is generally a little bit more middle of the road. And even in the top 10 of the month, there might be a few albums that are like, you know, things that I wanted to enjoy more than I did. The best albums of October are great, but most of them are just kind of this like 3.5, maybe bordering on 4-star range of like, yeah, this is pretty good. I like this, but I'm going to forget about this in approximately 2.5 milliseconds after I'm done talking about it, that kind of thing. And unfortunately, Extortionist was one of those, even though I did like the album. But next up, sorry for Steam notifications pulling up over there. That's not supposed to happen. Spite's new album, New World Killer, is another example of... This is a little bit better than the Extortionist one for me, just because the general soundscape is a little bit more my thing, but I think the full package doesn't come together the way that I would prefer for it to, and a lot of that is because it's an album that's like barely more than a half hour long, but it feels like it's way longer than that. It feels at least 50% longer than it actually is, and I think that's because there's not a whole lot of real interesting things happening here. There's not very much diversity, there's not very much uniqueness, there's not very much that would make it stand out for me injected into the formula. It's a very inoffensive album as I see here, so it's not one that I dislike to basically any degree. It was just one that was like, yeah, I listened to it and that was about it. That's about all I can say about it. I don't really have much more than that. It's a good album, it's fine, but again, I'm going to forget about this probably the second after I'm done talking about it. But that is our first category of releases to talk about. We should now move into entries 20 through 16, and at 20 is going to be another hot take for Keep It Quiet, but you'll see that even at rank 20 is ranked 3.5 stars, or rated 3.5 stars here. That is because there's an absurd amount of albums this month that I rated around 3.5 stars, where it was like, yeah, this is full-blown, like, right in the middle of my scale, like, average. I liked this. I didn't particularly love it, but I did not dislike it either, type of thing, where it's just right there in the middle. And Greyhaven was one I also expected a little bit more from, so this one's on the bottom of that pack, probably because of just general disappointment. I was expecting this to be amazing based off of the way that a lot of people were talking about both Greyhaven as a whole as well as the album specifically, and it was like, it was decent, you know, it was good, but it never fully stuck out to me. There was basically nothing about the album that really felt like it was doing the thing, you know, like it was hitting a mark, like it had the special sauce that was really going to attract me. But something that I touch on in the review that I actually wrote for this that actually kind of ended up being true for October as a whole was the very first week, the first weekend of October, the first major weekend of releases was so impressive and had so many records that I just really, really, really liked that basically everything that came after kind of had a hard time impressing me to any significant degree. So maybe it's the comparability of like, oh yeah, last week was like 5 or 6 albums that I just really, really, really liked, and then basically everything the rest of the month was just middle of the road, like this is solid, but it doesn't really stand out. It doesn't do anything so special like the first week of October had a lot of. So Greyhaven was good. Obviously I did not dislike it. I gave it 3.5 stars. That's like right my average. Like if you got a perfect average score, perfect average, you know what I mean. For me, 3.5 stars is like my direct average, so like this is good, but nothing super standout. Next up is The Cost of Clarity by Everyone Dies in Utah, a style of metalcore that I don't particularly love. Like it's something that was enjoyable to listen to for the sake of like a little bit of a throwback, and the style of metalcore being like a late 2000s, early 2010s style of metalcore that wasn't on the electronicore slash crapcore side of things, but was a little bit more classically oriented, but still moving more into that a more melody driven style rather than riff driven style. So The Cost of Clarity was a really interesting release to listen to for, you know, kind of a throwback kind of vibe, but because that throwback isn't necessarily for a specific style of metalcore that I inherently love a ton, it didn't really strike me as really being that amazing. You know, there was a lot about the back half of the album, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, on this record that made it worth listening to the whole way through, because the first handful of tracks were kind of just okay. I'm glad that I listened to the album. I'd not listened to any Everyone Dies in Utah before, so it was nice to like get an idea of what these guys were doing, at least right now. And if this is what these guys have been doing their whole career, then there's certainly an audience for that kind of thing. Just, you know, not something that I'm particularly taken to at the moment. Next up is going to be the deluxe edition of Blood Dynasty by Arch Enemy. The original version of this album came out several months ago, and I enjoyed the original quite a bit. I believe I gave the original 3.5 stars as well. The main reason why the deluxe edition doesn't get that bump up to 4 stars was because on this re-listen, I realized just like kind of how mediocre the opening like 3 or 4 songs on the album are. Like they're just, it's a lot to get through those first few tracks where it's like, this is kind of okay. But most of the rest of the album is really solid, and I have a lot of standout tracks here because most of the songs on the album are like right on par with each other as being like a, you know, a notably good track. But as a whole, the deluxe edition doesn't change a ton about Blood Dynasty. However, I do recommend that if you're going to listen to Blood Dynasty, do listen to the expanded deluxe edition of it, because I believe it's 3 bonus tracks that come with this are as good, or in a couple cases even better than most of the tracks on the base album. So I wanted to give this a slight half-star bump with the expanded edition because of those bonus tracks being as good as they are. But overall, it's still just, you know, a decent album. It's not like an above average, it's still just right there in the middle of the pack for me. But like I said, it is better than the original version, so there is that. Next up is going to be maybe another hot take, I'm not sure. Hell is Right in Front of Us by Immortal Disfigurement. I've not listened to Immortal Disfigurement's full-length album that released last year or something like that, but I was interested in checking out an EP for the sake of seeing what it is these guys are doing as a whole. But generally speaking, Immortal Disfigurement, let's put it this way. CJ's vocals are not my thing, so a big roadblock to me enjoying this is just CJ in general. Like even when you look back at like Lorna Shore stuff, CJ in Immortal was not an album that I particularly liked because I just don't really like CJ's style. I don't like his lack of enunciation, or rather I just don't find him to enunciate enough for my tastes. You know, there's a lot of just personal preference that goes on here compared to, say, somebody like Will Ramos. So listening to Immortal Disfigurement was like, okay, I'll give this a shot because it's an EP, it's a little bit shorter, people are really excited for this one. And I'm glad I did, because especially Hellhole, that song was actually quite good, but outside of that song, the EP didn't really do much to impress me either musically, and definitely not vocally. Neither the music side of things, the songwriting side of things, or the vocals really stood out to me as being great. So it was like, the EP's good, but not something that I'll probably ever listen to again. So there's that. Next up is going to be another kind of hit or miss album, and that's because Blight Flower by In Spite of Me has been argued on social media about whether it's AI or not, and I'm not particularly convinced it is. If it is AI, that's unfortunate, and I don't recommend it as a result of that, but for the moment I don't have any inherent reason to believe that it is made with AI. It just seems like a guy who's using general music writing programs like Odin to program guitars and general drum programming, stuff like that, just to be able to write music as somebody who can't really perform the actual instruments. If I were to write music, for example, that would be the way that I would do it, would be using Odin or other types of programs like that to make what I want to make, because I can't actually play the instruments myself. I can play drums, but it would take a lot more to actually record those than anything else. That would be a hassle. But in either case, this is a record that's like, I enjoy this for what it is. I hope that it's not AI, because it would be awful if I was out here saying like, yeah, this was pretty good, and it turned out being AI. I wouldn't be a fan of saying that. But at the same time, musically, it's pretty solid. I like the vocals a decent bit, and a lot of people were saying that like the vocals are obviously AI, and I disagree on that point as far as I can hear, largely because the vocals sound unpolished in a way that AI would not sound unpolished. At least that's the impression that I get based off of the things that I have heard. But in either case, I like what this album was doing. It's not anything super standout. It's not super unique or anything like that. It's just decent, and I just hope that it's not AI. But next up, we are going to move on to ranks, what is this, like 15 through 11 or something like that? So let's do it. Aviana's Void is an album that a lot of these records in this sort of range, I believe, are going to be releases that were put on my radar very recently, like, a day or two before the album released, or the day of the album's release, or something like that. So Void was one of those examples. I was hearing a lot of hype for Aviana here, but overall the album didn't do a ton to really stick out to me. It was one that I enjoyed listening to, but again, just a case of like, I'm probably going to forget about this album here in a few seconds. So when it comes to like album of the year type of thing, this isn't even going to be a consideration, that kind of thing, where it's like, I enjoyed this, it was worth listening to, but that's about all that I really have to say about it. I feel like I should have liked Void a little bit more than I did, but for some reason, I just didn't particularly cling to it. Next up is Shadow Work by Despised Icon, and again, sorry about Music Board having issues with displaying some of the album art and stuff like that. Shadow Work is a super solid deathcore album for what it is, but it's not entirely the type of deathcore that I was expecting it to be, and I also kind of expected for it to be like a lot better than it was, just based off the reputation that it developed in the first few hours of the morning on Friday here, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna hope that this is like a solid deathcore album, that like maybe it'll end up in my deathcore album of the year list or something like that, if I were to make one of those, hypothetically speaking. And it just didn't. Like, it's solid, it's good, definitely nothing about this record that I disliked at all. But I think there's been so many standout records within this space so far this year that this one had a hard time competing for me personally. Like, if you were going to say an album that was really stand out to me that I didn't expect to stand out to me, that would be something like the new Signs of the Swarm album, whereas the Despised Icon was like, maybe this will be good, maybe it won't, and then it turned out being solid, but that was about it. But yeah, I'm just kind of repeating the exact same thing that I've been saying about everything else, because so many releases this month were just this 3.5 star, like, didn't overly impress me, but did not disappoint me inherently either, so I don't know. Next up is The Light We Chase by Bloom, another album that I was looking forward to based off of the reputation that people would put on Bloom. I think the reason why this album is like 3.5 for me instead of being bumped up to 4, because I could see myself putting this up to 4, is that I think this is a very particular style of like modern melodic metalcore that sometimes it just isn't fully my thing. I think of artists like Invent Animate, where the songs that really click, the stuff that I enjoy, I really enjoy, but as a whole, like, isn't something that I'm going to spend that much time listening to. And I made that Invent Animate comparison within this album review because there's something about the sonic approach to this and sort of the vocal tendencies, some of the production on the vocals, that just reminded me of that sphere of modern metalcore at the moment. And like I said, just isn't entirely the thing that I'm looking for within the genre. Something that I respect a lot and that I'm really glad a ton of other people love, but I think The Light We Chase is good. I would have liked to enjoy this a lot more than I did, but it's something that I would be more interested in checking out, like at some other point down the road, exploring an entire artist's discography to kind of view it within that specific context, rather than as like a new album release to check out, where I tend to not latch on to these things as much in those contexts. Next up is Asleep at the Helm's new EP, and I know I have the artist page up. That's because the EP isn't here for some reason, but if you check out these 4 singles here, Tarnished Equilibrium, Photosynthetic, and Wilted Bloom, these are the first, well, I don't know what the order of the tracks on the EP off the top of my head, but these are 4 of the 5 songs on the EP, and the EP just includes another 5th song. The album art for the EP basically combines these 4 album covers plus another 5th one in there, all of that similar face style and like diagonal little clips. So it's basically just a collection of these 5 singles. An EP that I thought was super solid, and I obviously can't review on Music Board at the moment until that page exists, but it was an EP that I liked, but I was not expecting for it to be heavy, like really heavy actually. When it comes to this band, one of the things that I find to be the most standout about them, specifically on their 2022 album, which I liked a lot, is the melodies, like the vocal melodies, the choruses, stuff like that, that was just like really stood out as being something more unique within the genre. Even amidst the heavier moments, there was stuff like What Lurks Within, particularly because it featured Tobias Young, but there's a lot of like choruses and stuff here that like I can just pull off the top of my head. They're written in my memory because they're so good. The new EP, I believe it's called Ornate Resentment or something like that, I forget off the top of my head, but whatever it's called, is heavy. There's not very much cleans, there's not very much melodies. It's way heavier than I expected the entire time, and I also kind of would have preferred to have an album with like these 3 singles on them as well, because these 2 singles were really good. I don't remember much about this single, but like I would have liked to have at least like Candles on there, you know, like that's just something that I would have liked. I wasn't expecting for them to do 5 single releases that combined into an eventual EP, and like I said, just the general soundscape was way heavier than I was expecting, and when I want melodies from Asleep at the Helm, that kind of confused me a little bit, but as a whole, for what that EP is, I think it's definitely worth checking out, especially if you're somebody who hates when metalcore bands go soft. This band went a little bit heavier for this release, so I'm wondering if they're going to be doing anything in the future with like these other singles or something like that. I don't know, but I enjoyed the EP. Sorry to ramble about it for so long. Next up is going to be probably another hot take, and that's because a lot of people seem to be ragging on Legends by Sabaton. Maybe I'm giving this album a little bit more credit than it's due just because I haven't actually listened to a full Sabaton album before, but I liked Legends a lot. In fact, I found basically every song to be varying in specific sonic ways that was like, yeah, this is totally worth listening to as an album experience, and I liked that experience quite a bit. It definitely surprised me a little bit. I believe this is where I finally get into like the actual 4-star range of the ranking in here, and that's because this album surprised me so much I had to give it that bump, where realistically this would probably be like a 3.5 out of 5 for me, but because I was so surprised by how much I enjoyed it, I'd not listened to much Sabaton before, just a random song here or there, that surprise definitely led me to rate it a little bit more highly than that, because yeah, I really enjoyed Legends. Legends was super solid to me, and it's a little bit disappointing that not a ton of other people are really liking it that much. Like one person gave it 4.5 stars. A few other people gave it 4 stars with me. There's a solid amount with that sort of average 3.5 range, but there's a lot of people that just weren't very impressed with this. And to be honest, I can see why. I understand it. It was just I was very surprised by how much I did enjoy Legends, so it ended up right about there. But next up, I believe we are moving now into my top 10. So let's go ahead and check some of those out. This is where basically everything is 4 stars and up, I believe. The Father of Make Believe, another deluxe edition from a Coheed and Cambria album that released earlier in the year. I went ahead and re-listened to this with the bonus entities tracks in there, and this was great. Like, I had a better time with this album on the re-listen than I did the first time, just as a whole, which I expected to be the case, and so it bumped the rating up a bit. I believe I gave the original 3.5 out of 5, but also the bonus tracks were just great. I think that Key Entity Extraction 9 isn't precisely what I would have liked for like a new closer for the album, but in general, these little bonus tracks here were really good. particularly 7. Like 7 was just an incredible song. I understand why they made this the single for moving into the deluxe version of the album, essentially. And given that I am a weirdo who really, really likes the Afterman albums, like they're amongst my favorite, Coheed and Cambria for sure. The fact that we had more of these entity extraction stuff just kind of like called back to that, and some of the sonic tendencies called back to that a little bit in ways that I just really liked. I'm not super huge on the storyline of the Coheed albums. I'm not super huge on the actual lore of it. Like, I don't know very much of it. I don't understand a ton of it. It's not something that I've looked into very much. Strangely enough, for somebody who loves concept albums a ton, I have not looked much into the actual storylines of Coheed and Cambria's concept albums. But even despite that, I just really liked the kind of callback to the key entity stuff. And so I enjoyed that. I really enjoyed Father of Make Believe's Deluxe Edition. I was glad to check it out again in the Deluxe Edition. I'm looking forward to the next couple chapters of that story, because I am pretty sure they said that Vaxxus would be 5 albums, so I'm looking forward to the next couple of those. Next up is going to be a semi-technical inclusion here. That's chapter 2 Over Again by Midwinter, because these guys have released the album, or the artist page here includes stuff by a different Midwinter that's not the same Midwinter. They released chapter 1 Losing You a few months back, and I can't remember if I even listened to these songs back then. I might have, but I don't remember doing so. And then chapter 2 came out. I was like, okay, that's cool. I didn't realize that 2 of the songs on chapter 2 were just the straight up chapter 1 songs again. So I was thinking this was like a whole new EP, 4 brand new songs. It wasn't. But in either case, I would be very surprised if a chapter 3 came out before the end of the year. Maybe. But given that it took about 4 months for chapter 2 to come out after chapter 1, I wouldn't expect for it so I decided to actually rate and include chapter 2 here within the context of the 2025 year in music, because who knows, I don't know if these guys are going to be combining all the chapters, however many they release, into like a full album at some point next year or what. But I did want to give a shout to some of these songs because they're good. Chasing Butterflies off of chapter 2 specifically is great. Dislocated off of chapter 1 is just an incredible song. Midwinter's really good. In fact, I would argue that chapter 2 is like, it's kind of approaching, like, a couple of these songs are like better than most of the songs off of their album EP thing that came out in like January this year. These guys have just been pumping out stuff, and it's all been really solid. So I'm looking forward to seeing what these guys do next. This ended up pretty high on my rating because I don't know, because I just liked it a lot, and I'm looking forward to hearing more. Next up is Memoirs of Despair by Decayer, an album that was not on my radar until the day that it actually came out on the 3rd, and surprised me a ton. This was definitely one of those cases of like, not a whole ton about what this album is doing is super unique within like deathcore or anything along those lines, but ended up just being a really solid execution of things that I was looking for here. I believe I said my only major complaint is how the first handful of songs take a little bit of time to get to the super meaty middle of the record. That is true. The middle and back half of the album is way good, and the first handful of songs like take a little bit to kind of get there. But as a whole, Memoirs of Despair was just a really good album, and if anybody put this in their album of the year list, I would not blame them. In fact, prior to this past weekend, Memoirs of Despair actually made it to 25 on my top 25 list. It has since been kicked out of the list because of some albums that came out on the 31st, or specifically an album that came out on the 31st. But really solid record. I definitely recommend this one if you like deathcore. I thought it was great. And next up is Creature in the Black Night by Dayseeker, which is a really great album because it's a lot better than the last one. You know, I'm not going to go ahead and say that, like, what is it even called? Dark Sun. I'm not going to call Dark Sun an objectively bad album. It's just not quite what I wanted from the band. I know that Rory was going through a lot of emotional turmoil on account of his father's passing during the songwriting process of the album, but part of like just the general balancing of it didn't really work for me. It was way softer of an album than I wanted. Like, the band has continued to generally get a little bit softer as time has gone on, and that's not exactly what I want. I understand why they made that decision, going from Dreaming is Sinking, Waking is Rising if that's the title, into Sleep Talk, which was notably more melody focused, and then Dark Sun, like that kind of seems a natural evolution. It's just that Dark Sun wasn't precisely what I wanted, for example, and the best songs were the first few songs, and the first couple songs were easily the heaviest. So when you pair songs like that together and also make the first couple songs like two of the main singles, you're kind of building an expectation for something that Dark Sun ultimately disappointed me personally with regard to. So I was like, I wanted this to be heavier, I wanted it to be more. Creature in the Black Knight is more what I wanted this band to do, given what Sleep Talk is, for example, because it still has a lot of the softer moments, the melodic stuff that both Sleep Talk and Dark Sun do a lot, but it also has a lot more heavier moments. It has more of the breakdowns, which, as basic as Dayseeker's breakdowns in these couple albums, these last few albums can be, they are impactful. They know how to place them to have meaning, even if what they're doing technically aren't necessarily the most unique thing in the world. I think Creature and the Black Knight came back to be a much better balance of their sonic strengths than arguably even Sleep Talk was. Like, Sleep Talk is an amazing record, has a lot of songs on there that I absolutely love, but most of those songs I came to love over listening to that album many times, particularly when I was in some emotionally dark straits myself. But Creature in the Black Knight sonically is like what I want from this particular version of Dayseeker. I think Dreaming is Sinking, Waking is Rising is still my favorite Dayseeker album, but if this is the general sonic style that these guys are doing from Sleep Talk till now, Creature in the Black Knight is arguably the best example of the balance of that. And I think that my rating of this record, and definitely my standout tracks of the record, is going to expand and change a lot as time goes on as I listen to this a bit more. All of this review here was based off of one listen, and this is an album that I feel like I need to listen to like 5 to 10 times before I really know what it is that I think about it, because of how complicated my feelings are with basically all of their past discography. But Creature in the Black Knight was definitely a return to form for me personally with regard to their music, so I enjoyed it a lot. Next up is Orbit Culture, and feels bad that they're not in the top 5 for the month. This is, again, another album that I think I could see raising up to 4.5 out of 5 stars with time. And I think the only reason that it's not is because the track listing feels a little bit off kilter. Something about the exact ordering of the songs doesn't flow the smoothest for me personally after listening to this a few times, which is something that I'll probably get used to, but something that puts me off just a tiny bit. I don't know whether I like Death Above Life or Descent better. I think Death Above Life has a couple songs that are better than anything on Descent, but I think Descent is probably the more balanced record, the one that flows more smoothly. So like these two are like right in conversation with each other. But when I say they're in conversation with each other, you have to understand that I like Shaman EP, Nija, and what's it called? The Forgotten Ones? Whatever that EP was that they released right after Descent. Those three are by far my favorite things that Orbit Culture has released, Death Above Life and Descent being very close behind them. But yeah, Death Above Life was just one that I feel like the track list is wrong for some reason. The ordering of the tracks just feels wrong to me. So that's basically the reason why it's ever so slightly lower. But I love Orbit Culture. Arguably my favorite metal band working today, like as far as the consistency of their releases from 2020 onwards. It's just been so incredible. So I'm not disparaging this at all. Again, I really like this album, but I want to like it a tiny bit more, so I definitely need to spend a little bit more time with it, and I do need to listen to it and probably Descent back to back, in accordance with one another to compare them a little bit more directly. But now we're going to go into my top 5. And The Axe Forgets, The Tree Remembers is an album that I listened to just very recently. It came out in the middle of the month, if I'm not mistaken. We had October 15th. But I didn't listen to it until the very end of the month, basically. And I was very surprised by this. I was actually really, really, really into this. A lot. I'm very glad I circled back around to it, because this was the album that knocked Decayer out of my top 25 just this past weekend, right? It was one that was really good. I think the build up of it is really great. The first 6 tracks, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the first 5 of them, there's a couple short songs that are Forethought is basically an interlude between the title track and Hindsight. The first song is just an intro, really great intro, builds the ambience and the tone perfectly. Pickering Street is also a surprisingly short song. Even Quarry Place is pretty short. Like, I feel like most of the first like half of this album is basically just building up to a slow burn to get you into the last handful of songs, because from Hindsight all the way through Curtains, it is just banger after banger after banger. And Hindsight is a soft song, to be fair. There's a lot of cleans going on in there, but it is a very emotionally resonant track. And then 1983 kicks ass, and the last three songs also do that as well. Like, it's just from here all the way to the end is just beaters of songs. I love the back half of this album so much, and even though that might sound slightly disparaging to the front half, I do think the front half is so effective at like building up that tone, building up that tension for the back half to be as good as it is almost something to praise rather than complain about. It's just very well constructed. I love the record. So one of the other users on here said it's like two EPs put together, which is so weird. And honestly, I kind of agree with that take, because the front half and the back half are kind of different in their focus. But like I said, I do think that's because the front half is largely just a slow burn, building up the tension, so that the back half works so well, and the back half does truly work so well. I just really, really liked this album. I was very surprised by how much I liked it. But because the front half didn't fully satisfy, like it was a lot of that build up, it took a little bit of time for it to really pay off. The next four albums that I'm going to be talking about today are all a little bit better than that for me. All That Follows by Currents is a brilliant EP. My only complaint about this is that the vocals are a little bit too quiet in the mix. There are times when I just wish I could hear Brian a little bit better, because the guitars and everything like that are mixed so well. Like, it's very beefy. This EP is incredibly beefy, but I wish I could hear Brian a little bit better. That's literally my only complaint here. EP is super solid, way better than the 2023 album, which, to be fair, was good. I think this is going to be the Currents that I return to the most, other than their 2020 album, 2021 album, whichever was the one previous to The Death We Seek. Yeah, The Way It Ends in 2020, so I was right about that. The Way It Ends is great. But other than The Way It Ends, All That Follows will probably be the Currents that I return to the most often, just because this was so good. And for being only 5 songs, they decided to pack an album's worth of ideas into those 5 songs. So they're so varying, they're so good. Not one of these songs sounds like any of the others. It's just really fantastic release. Like I said, not being able to hear Brian as much as I would like to is literally the only thing that I have to complain about this. So it's just incredible. Next up was a very big surprise release for me, which the fact that I'm ranking it this highly may not be fair, but because I'm not much of a death metal person, I found myself really, really hooked on what this was doing for some reason. There's a couple of tracks on here that I don't particularly love, but like most of the rest of it is just so good. I think it's like the first 2 songs. I don't remember specifically my full album experience, like in terms of the specific songs, but like just everything about this was good. Picking out a standout tracks list was so difficult, because basically every song that passed, I was like, that one's getting added to the list, that one's getting added, and eventually I had to decide just like, okay, which of these can I cut? And so I cut as many from the list as I could. I just really had a great time here. I'm not much of a death metal person. Like I kind of said at the beginning of this little section about this album, I don't love death metal, but for some reason what Enragement is doing here just really, 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 really clicked for me. And for reasons that I don't fully understand, actually. So the fact that I enjoyed this as much as I did, because I really did love this album for some reason, it ended up really high in my rankings for the month, solely out of surprise, right? Like, it's just, I'm shocked by how much I enjoyed this, but I really enjoyed it. Next up is one of my long metal loves. Trivium is arguably the main reason that I'm able to stand any metal with unclean vocals at all, was just getting obsessed with Trivium and slowly getting accustomed to that kind of thing over the course of a couple years, back in like 2017, 2018, Really love Trivium, and their new EP is great. It is also a great send-off for Alex Bent as the drummer. I'm really sad to see him go. He's maybe my favorite drummer of all time, but Struck Dead is such a fantastic showcase, not just of what the band is doing in the 2020s, which it absolutely is, but it's also such a great, meaty record for Alex. The production on the drums is unbelievably good on this record, like just genuinely unbelievably fantastic. Love the way this album sounds, and for being just 3 songs, like, it packs a heavy punch. This is almost worth an entire Trivium album, despite only being like 17 minutes, when Trivium albums are basically always like 50 plus minutes. Yeah, that says a heck of a lot. Struck Dead is incredible. I really liked this EP, and I'm looking forward to seeing what album 11 sounds like, even though they're going to have a new drummer. I think that Rudy will make a great addition to the band, but yeah, Struck Dead was definitely a big surprise for me. Like, I was expecting it to be good. I always did, and I'm really glad we got a new release with Alex, but it still exceeded my expectations a little bit. My apologies, I fat-fingered F12, and every time I fat-finger F12, things go horribly wrong on my PC. My number 1 pick, my album of the month for October, was another surprise listen that I didn't even have on my radar until, like, the day it released, actually. By Blood Red Hourglass, We Should Be Buried Like This. Incredible album. I hardly even know what to say about this, so I'm basically just going to read what my review says, because honestly, I feel like it did a really good job of consolidating. I was really blown away by this. This bridges what I love about metalcore with some of the heavier sides of Melodeath together so incredibly well. Like, what else can I put into words? This album was very riffy, it was melodic in just the right ways, it had incredibly tasteful, unclean decisions. There were really great soaring choruses. Even the choruses with uncleans were really stand out and up there for me. The production and musicality, the diverse songwriting, nothing about this album ever came close to wearing out its welcome for me. No idea was overdone. Honestly astounded. This is all very true. Like, I really loved this album. Easily my album of the month. The only album this month that I gave 5 stars to, and an album that ended up making a surprise appearance in my favorite albums of the year. Like, if I go to my top 25 albums of the year list, just to show you guys for fits and giggles, yeah, there's Enragement in here, so it's up there. I really enjoyed that album. There's Carcosa. Carcosa pushed a bunch of stuff down to cause Decayer to end up out of my list, but Blood Red Hourglass ended up in the top 5. That is how much I enjoyed this album after just a couple listens that day. It was really great. Like, such a stupendous album. Yeah. So, yeah, let's take a look at my overall October rankings. Like I said, Ornate Resentment by Asleep at the Helms should be at rank 11 or so here, like either 11 or 12. Like, it doesn't really matter. Somewhere around the range where, Legends is at. But yeah, that's how I would rank what I listened to in October. It was really good. Like, there was a couple, I mean, it was basically just that first week that had this and this and this and this all together that were just super standout records. There was a lot in October to like, but there was a lot of it that was also just right middle of the road, that it felt bad having it as low as some of it is, but when some of the top stuff was as good as it was, I don't really know what to say other than that's as good as I could do. But that is going to cut it for this video that ended up being long again. I'm never going to be able to make one of these videos be short unless I can listen to less than 20 albums in a month. But thank you for watching this video. If you did, let me know what your favorite releases of October were. I would sure love to hear it. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.